Welcome to the deep dive. So I want you to imagine this scenario for a moment. It is 2 o'clock in the morning, right? And you are jolted awake by a sound that, honestly, absolutely every homeowner dreads on a primal level.
Oh, I already know where this is going.
Right. It is the sound of rushing water. And I don't mean just a little drip. I mean a steady, heavy flow.
That is just pure panic.
Total panic. So you throw off the covers, you run downstairs, and you discover that a primary pipe has burst right there in your basement. Water is rapidly pooling around your furnace, it's soaking into the drywall, and, sheer terror sets in.
Because you're literally watching thousands of dollars of damage happen in real time.
Exactly. So you're wading through this cold water, you finally find the main shutoff valve, and you wrench it closed to stop the bleeding. The immediate disaster is paused, right? But now you have a flooded basement and zero running water in your house.
And you need help, like immediately.
Immediately. So first thing the next morning, you start making these frantic calls. A neighbor highly recommends this local handyman to you. You call him up and he comes right over. He shows up, tools in hand, and he doesn't seem stressed at all.
Which is exactly what you want to see.
Exactly. He assesses the situation super calmly, takes out his tools, cleanly cuts out the busted section of copper pipe, solders in a brand new piece perfectly, checks the pressure, tests the system, and, he even helps you clean up the mess.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The work is totally flawless. The plumbing holds up beautifully. Your basement starts drying out, and you are just absolutely thrilled. You shake his hand, and you pay him.
A happy ending.
Well, wait. Because a week later, you're chatting with that same neighbor, and you happen to find out that this brilliant, efficient handyman is not actually a state-licensed plumber.
Oh, there it is.
Right. So the question is, does it matter to you? Sitting there in your dry house, should you care? As long as the work was top-notch and the crisis was averted.
I mean, that is a phenomenal question. It really cuts right to the heart of how we as a society think about work and safety and, expertise. And it's actually the perfect entry point for our mission today.
Because we aren't just doing an episode about pipes today.
No, not at all. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about plumbing, but plumbing is really just the doorway into this massive, largely invisible web of rules that governs almost everything around us.
And this web is known as occupational licensing.
Exactly. Occupational licensing. It is this deeply entrenched system that dictates exactly who is legally allowed to work in certain jobs, how much you, the consumer, are forced to pay for incredibly basic services, and how it quietly impacts, honestly, hundreds of billions of dollars in the U.S. economy every single year.
It's massive. And as we go through this deep dive today, I really want to ask you, the listener, to keep an open mind. Because we are going to challenge some deeply held assumptions you might have about why these licenses even exist in the first place.
We really are. Are they there to protect consumers from danger, or are they protecting existing businesses from competition?
Right, that's the big question. And we're going to look at a massive stack of sources today to figure this out. We're pulling from a surprisingly intense Reddit thread from a handyman who is desperately trying to navigate this system.
That thread is wild.
It really is. We're also examining a local news report at a WBRZ in Louisiana detailing a looming, massive plumbing crisis. We are poring over official legislative testimony regarding a bill in Pennsylvania. And to anchor all of this in the macroeconomics, we are going deep into a massive, data-heavy national report from the Institute for Justice.
Often referred to as the IJ.
Right, the IJ. And the report is titled, At What Cost?
So our goal is to synthesize this whole stack and look really closely at that tension between consumer safety and economic monopoly. We need to explore how licensing has grown from a very niche requirement decades ago into this dominant, undeniable force in the modern American labor market.
And most importantly, we're going to break down the true, often hidden economic cost of this whole system.
So let's start at the absolute ground level, all right? Before we get into the trillion-dollar macroeconomic math, we need to look at the human element.
Yes, and I found this on a subreddit called Raska Plumber. I was reading through this thread, and it is fascinating because it is just completely unfiltered.
It's just real people dealing with the rules.
Exactly. There's this user who posted, too, asking the community for advice. He explains that he has been doing plumbing work for years, essentially operating as an unlicensed handyman.
Like the guy in your story.
Just like him. He writes that he honestly never knew he needed a state license until very recently. He'd been working under the wing of an older, experienced guy who recently passed away, and since then, he's just been doing the work on his own, relying on his skills.
Which is pretty common, honestly.
It is. But now, he wants to go legit. He wants to be fully compliant and get a plumbing contractor's license, specifically looking at the laws in Virginia or maybe West Virginia.
But the moment he tries to step into the formal system, he hits this massive structural roadblock.
A huge one.
Because the system doesn't actually care about his ability, it cares about his paperwork.
Right. He is looking at the state requirements, and he realizes that to get this official piece of paper, the state might force him to become an apprentice to someone else for 4 solid years.
4 years. That's a huge commitment.
It's massive, and he is understandably furious. He writes in the thread, quote, "I have no interest in decreased wages or working for someone else." Now, you can't blame him. He already knows how to do the job. He's been doing it flawlessly for years.
To him, it feels completely backward.
Totally. To me, it's like being a math whiz who wants to test out of a basic college algebra class because you already know all the material. You've mastered it.
Right, you just want to take the final exam.
Yes. But the university administration looks at you and says, "No, we don't care what you know. You still have to sit at a tiny desk in this specific classroom for 4 years, pay the tuition, and take the pop quizzes just to get the piece of paper that says you know what you already know."
That is a very apt comparison. It is just a profound frustration. And when you read the responses he gets from other plumbers in that Reddit thread, you immediately begin to see why occupational licensing is such a nightmare landscape to navigate.
Oh, the comments are all over the place.
Because the rules are not based on some universal law of physics or plumbing. They are this patchwork quilt of geographic contradictions. The advice he receives varies wildly depending entirely on where the commenters happen to live.
It really does. You read through the comments, and one person points out that in Virginia, where he's looking to get licensed, if a specific job is under $1,000, you might not even need a license at all. You could just do the work.
But if you drive across the border into West Virginia, that threshold jumps to $2,500.
Right. So right out of the gate, the legal definition of what requires a highly trained, licensed professional changes literally just by driving a few miles across an invisible state line.
Which is totally arbitrary.
Completely arbitrary. And then another commenter from Virginia offers what looks like a potential loophole. They say, look, if you know an OG inspector, like an older established city inspector who can personally vouch for your 10 years of on-the-job experience, that inspector can just sign a piece of paper for you.
And just bypass the whole thing.
Yes. With that one signature, you can skip the 4-year apprenticeship entirely and sit right down to take your master plumber's test.
But then you have to contrast that informal, almost handshake-based system with the commenters chiming in from New York City.
Oh, the New York guys were intense.
Very intense. The New York plumbers jump into the thread and explain that in NYC, an inspector signature means absolutely nothing. A personal voucher is completely worthless there.
So what do they require?
New York requires proof of Social Security earnings to prove that you are actually legally employed by a licensed plumbing company. They want a strict, unassailable paper trail. On top of that, they require a minimum of 7 years working directly under a licensed master plumber, plus another 2 years holding a journeyman's card.
Wow.
Yeah, it is a highly rigid, heavily documented pathway that takes almost a decade to complete.
Wait, I really have to stop and unpack the logic here. We have one state where a handshake and a nod from the right inspector gets you straight to the test, and another city where you need nearly a decade of W-2 tax forms and bureaucratic paperwork just to prove you are allowed to hold a wrench. Why is there such a massive discrepancy?
Well, the discrepancy highlights the underlying tension in all of this licensing stuff. It's the battle between fraud prevention and gateway keeping.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the New York City rules are explicitly designed to prevent fraud. They want an undeniable paper trail to ensure you can't just get your buddy to sign off on your hours over a beer at the local pub. They want to guarantee you actually put in the time. Right, which makes sense on the surface.
It does. But we have to look at the unintended consequence of that rigid structure. It creates a virtually impenetrable barrier for an independent, self-taught worker.
Because they learned outside the system.
Exactly. If you learn the trade outside of their official sanctioned channels, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how many basements you have successfully repiped, this system treats you as a complete novice.
That is so frustrating.
You are forced to start at the absolute bottom, take a massive pay cut to become an apprentice, and surrender years of your life to fulfill a bureaucratic requirement rather than a skills-based one.
It honestly reminds me of letting the current starting players on a football team act as the referees at the open tryouts for new players.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Because, of course, they're going to blow the whistle and invent impossible drills for anyone who looks like they might be good enough to take their starting job. They are heavily incentivized to keep the new guys out.
That is exactly what is happening. But this frustration isn't just confined to internet message boards. The exact same argument this Reddit handyman is making is currently paralyzing a state legislature.
Yes, let's talk about Louisiana.
This brings us to the news report from WBRZ in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Lawmakers down there are desperately trying to overhaul their current plumbing license system.
And they're not doing it just for fun.
No, they are doing it because they are staring down the barrel of a terrifying national crisis. According to the data cited in the legislative hearings, the United States is facing a projected shortage of 550,000 plumbers by the year 2027.
That is a staggering number. 500,000 missing tradespeople in a single industry.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
And during those hearings, the executive director of the Louisiana Licensing Board for Contractors made a point to note that this shortage isn't isolated just to plumbing. It is a crisis affecting almost all skilled trades right now.
So what happens when we run out of these workers?
Well, we need to think about the physical mechanism of what happens to a local economy when you have a shortage that severe. When there are no plumbers, construction on new homes slows down to a crawl.
Right, you can't finish a house without pipes.
Exactly. And when the housing supply stalls, housing prices go up for everyone. On the consumer side, basic repairs like fixing that burst pipe in your basement take weeks to schedule and cost significantly more.
Because the few plumbers who are actually available can charge essentially whatever they want.
Simple supply and demand.
So Louisiana's proposed solution to this crisis is actually pretty radical considering how entrenched these licensing systems are. They want to drastically lower the barrier to entry.
How drastically?
Specifically, they want to cut the required training hours in half. Right now, to reach the first licensing tier in Louisiana, it requires 4,000 hours of training.
4,000? Okay.
Lawmakers want to drop that to 2,000 hours. To reach the next tier, which currently requires over 7,000 hours, they want to drop it to 3,000 hours.
That is a massive reduction.
It is. And the core argument from the lawmakers is just basic economics. By lowering these immense barriers, it will be easier for younger people or career switchers to enter the profession. That increases the number of plumbers, which increases market competition, and ultimately lowers prices and wait times for you, the consumer.
However, that proposal was met with fierce, organized pushback from the people who are already inside the industry.
Naturally, the starting players don't want new guys on the team.
Exactly. During the committee hearings, existing, fully licensed plumbers lined up to testify against the bill. They argued vehemently that cutting these hours would lead to a dangerous drop in the quality of work.
Do they give any specific examples?
Well, one licensed plumber, Zach Payne, gave a very passionate, highly quotable testimony. He stated that plumbers are, quote, the barrier that separates our communities from disease.
Okay, wait. I have to play devil's advocate here and push back on the framing of this.
Go for it.
Because when you hear that quote, it sounds like dramatic turf protection. But historically speaking, wasn't cholera eradicated in major cities largely because of modern plumbing and sewage management?
That is historically accurate, yes.
Right. So isn't that plumber actually kind of right? If a guy wires my house wrong, it literally burns down while I'm sleeping. If a plumber cross-contaminates the fresh water line with a sewage line, a whole neighborhood could get dysentery.
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is. So shouldn't we demand an incredibly high barrier to entry when public health and lives are literally on the line? Like, maybe 7,000 hours isn't crazy?
It is a totally valid pushback, and it is exactly why the safety argument is so powerful and so frequently used by these boards. Yes, improper plumbing can cause catastrophic health issues. Yes, bad electrical work causes fires. The threat is absolutely real.
Yeah,
But the question we have to ask is not whether safety matters. The question is whether mandating 7,000 hours of apprenticeship is the only way, or even the best way, to achieve that safety.
How do we figure that out?
To answer that, we have to look outside the borders of Louisiana and compare their claims to how other states operate. This is where the legislative testimony from the Institute for Justice regarding Pennsylvania's House Bill 390 becomes incredibly revealing.
Okay, what's happening in Pennsylvania?
Right now, Pennsylvania does not have a statewide plumbing license at all. The lawmakers there are trying to create one from scratch. But Jessica Poitras, the legislative counsel at the IJ, provided testimony that completely dismantles the argument that 7,000 hours of mandated training is universally necessary for public health.
Oh, I read her testimony. It is wild because it points out that 14 states in the U.S. do not license plumbers at the state level at all. 14 states?
That's a huge chunk of the country.
It is. And we aren't just talking about sparse rural states where everyone lives on a farm and fixes their own. New York and Ohio do not license plumbers statewide. They leave it up to local municipalities or they rely on general contractor rules.
Right.
And the key takeaway here is that those 14 states are operating without any catastrophic, widespread disease outbreaks. There is no cholera epidemic sweeping through rural Ohio just because they lack a statewide plumbing board.
Exactly. And if we look even closer at the states that do require state-level licenses, the inconsistency shatters the illusion of a science-based safety standard.
What do you mean?
Well, of the remaining states that license plumbers, 24 have absolutely no mandated training hours whatsoever in their stack sheets.
Wait, really? None?
None. 16 states have absolutely no experience requirements to get a license.
So the 7,000 hours in Louisiana is just made up.
It certainly isn't based on a universal scientific consensus.
Yeah.
And when it comes to continuing education, the classes you take to ensure you are up to date on the latest safety codes, the requirements are all over the map. They range from 0 hours required to 4 hours a year to 24 hours every 3 years.
That is just totally all over the map, honestly.
There is absolutely no national consensus on what makes a plumber safe.
Yeah.
If public health universally required 7,000 hours of training to prevent disease, as the Louisiana plumber passionately suggested, we wouldn't see 14 states getting by perfectly fine with 0 statewide hours. The data simply does not support the apocalyptic warnings.
It really is like finding out that half the country is allowed to drive a car on the highway without ever taking a driving test, and then looking at the data and realizing there are no more car crashes in those states than anywhere else.
That's a perfect analogy.
It just forces you to question the absolute necessity of the test itself. But this raises a huge question for me.
Which is?
If plumbing at least offers a plausible historical argument about public safety and sanitation, and yet the data shows the strict licenses aren't the thing actually keeping us safe, why are these licenses expanding? Right, like why is Pennsylvania trying to invent a new one? Why is Louisiana fighting so hard to keep their 7,000-hour rule? To understand that, we have to zoom way, way out. We have to look at the massive national data in the IJs at what cost report to see how this system actually metastasized.
We are now moving from the micro handyman on Reddit and a local hearing in Baton Rouge to the macroeconomics of the United States labor market.
This is where it gets crazy.
It really does. The Institute for Justice report was authored by Dr. Morris Kleiner and Dr. Evgeny Vorotnikov. They draw on massive national data sets to estimate the true economic impact of these laws. And to understand the scope, we have to look at the historical timeline.
And the most mind-blowing statistic in this entire report, the one that made me stop reading, put my notes down, and just stare at the wall for a minute, is the historical shift.
The growth is unbelievable.
In the 1950s, only 5% of American workers needed a license to do their jobs. 1 in 20. Today, that number is roughly 19%.
Almost 1 in 5.
Almost 1 in 5 American workers now requires explicit permission from the government to earn a living in their chosen field. And that varies wildly by state. It is around 14% in Georgia, but it climbs all the way up to nearly 27% in Nevada.
Over a quarter of the workforce in Nevada.
How did this happen? How did we go from 5% to almost 30% in some places?
It happens because licenses act as a highly effective, legally enforced economic bottleneck. They artificially restrict the supply of practitioners.
Break down the physical mechanism of how this works for us.
Okay, think of it from the perspective of an established, currently practicing professional in literally any field. If you and your peers can convince the state government to create a license for your job, and you can make the entry requirements steep enough, say requiring 7,000 hours of unpaid apprenticeship, thousands of dollars in specialized tuition, and incredibly difficult, obscure exams, far fewer people will be able to enter your profession.
Because you've built a massive wall around yourselves.
Exactly. And this is not a bug, it is the feature. This bottleneck gives you and the other currently licensed workers a government-granted monopoly.
A monopoly.
With dramatically fewer competitors allowed to operate in your city or state, you can charge significantly higher prices for your services without fear of being undercut by a cheaper upstart.
And the data absolutely proves this wage premium exists, right?
Oh, definitively.
The IJ report shows that licensing inflates the mean hourly earnings of licensed workers by somewhere between 12.5% to 14.1%, with a national average economic return of 13.88%.
Basically a guaranteed 15% raise.
Right. And in some specific states, that premium is massive. In Colorado, licensed workers make 28% more than they would in a free market, purely because of that monopoly protection.
And look at Hawaii.
Oh my gosh, in Hawaii, it is a staggering 63% wage premium.
Now, if you are the one holding the license, a 15% to 60% wage bump sounds fantastic. It is a great deal for you.
Of course it is.
But as economists, we always have to ask, who is paying for that premium? That money doesn't just magically generate itself out of thin air. That premium is a hidden tax, a cost entirely borne by the consumer, by you, the listener, and by the wider economy.
This brings us to a brilliant concept coined by the famous economist Milton Friedman, which is highlighted beautifully in these discussions. It is called the Cadillac Effect.
I love this analogy.
Let me explain this because it perfectly crystallizes what is happening here. Imagine if the government decided tomorrow that for the sake of public safety on the highways, it was suddenly illegal to sell, buy, or drive anything except luxury Cadillacs.
That's Cadillacs.
Right. No more basic Hondas, no more reliable Toyotas, absolutely no more used Ford sedans. Only top-of-the-line, brand-new Cadillacs are legally allowed on the road.
Okay.
Now, the proponents of this new law would stand at a podium and argue, look at the data. The average quality of cars on the road has skyrocketed. Every single car now has advanced anti-lock brakes, premium airbags, reinforced seal frames, and lane assist. Everyone is much safer.
And technically speaking, their data wouldn't be wrong. The average quality of the vehicles legally allowed on the road would be much higher.
Right. But what about the person who just needed a cheap, reliable $3,000 used Honda to get to their night shift job? They are suddenly forced by the government to pay an absolute fortune for a luxury car they didn't need, didn't want, and probably can't afford.
And even worse, those who literally cannot afford the Cadillac are forced to walk.
Exactly.
They are entirely priced out of the transportation market. This is exactly what happens when you mandate high-level occupational licenses for basic, everyday services.
You're forced to buy the Cadillac.
Yes. When you are forced by law to hire a fully licensed master professional with 7,000 hours of training to fix a minor everyday issue, you are paying that monopoly price. You are being forced by the state to buy the Cadillac when a Honda would have done the job perfectly well.
And just like the people forced to walk in your analogy, some consumers simply cannot afford the licensed professional.
So what do?
So they face a terrible choice. They either try to do dangerous electrical or structural work themselves, which actually decreases public safety, or they go without service entirely, living in substandard conditions.
Which totally defeats the purpose of the safety argument.
Exactly. Plumbing at least offers a plausible argument about public safety and sanitation, even if we just debunk the training hours. But that safety argument completely falls apart when you look at how this system has metastasized into other industries.
It really does.
As we dig deeper into the IJ report, we see that this licensing model has spread like wildfire to professions where the public safety argument completely disintegrates into sheer absurdity.
When you step back and start comparing the licensing requirements across different professions, the total disconnect between actual public safety and the regulatory burdens becomes undeniable.
Here is a stunning comparison straight from the data in the report. On average, across the country, it takes 11 times as much mandatory training to become a licensed cosmetologist, someone who cuts, dyes, and styles hair, as it does to become a licensed emergency medical technician, an EMT.
11 times as much. For hair.
I want to pause and just ask this genuinely.
Yeah.
How can any rational functioning legal system justify requiring 11 times more training to cut split ends and apply hair dye than to stabilize a trauma victim and save someone's life in the back of a speeding ambulance?
It is entirely irrational if you assume the system was built on a foundation of public safety. If safety was the goal, EMTs would have the highest training requirements in the state.
Obviously.
But it makes perfect logical sense if you understand the economic mechanism known as regulatory capture.
Okay, what is regulatory capture?
Regulatory capture occurs when the very government boards and agencies that were created to oversee and regulate an industry end up being completely controlled by the active members of that industry.
The starting players acting as the referees again.
Precisely. How does this happen physically? These state licensing boards are almost always staffed by existing successful practitioners from the field. They are appointed by governors who rely on industry recommendations.
Right.
Once they are on the board, they use their position to lobby state legislatures to create new rules, expand the required training hours, and invent new licenses specifically to keep out new competitors.
So why cosmetologists and not EMTs?
Because cosmetologists have highly organized, well-funded private lobbying groups pushing for more hours to protect their salons. EMTs, who often work for municipal governments or under medical directors, do not have the same incentive structure to build walls around their profession.
So it's basically rent-seeking behavior. They're using the legislative power of the state to protect their own profit margins.
Precisely. They are using the government to protect their economic rents.
It's just wild.
And the IJ report provides a somewhat comical but very revealing real-world example of this exact mechanism happening in Minnesota.
Well, the music therapists.
Yes, the music therapists.
Oh.
A small group of industry representatives for music therapists actively went to the state government and begged to be regulated.
They asked for it.
They demanded that the state government pass a law requiring anyone calling themselves a music therapist to have a specific bachelor's degree, complete 1,200 clinical hours, and pass a state-approved exam.
And what was their reasoning?
Well, their primary argument during these hearings wasn't that rogue, unlicensed music therapists were somehow injuring patients with dangerous guitar solos.
Right. No one is getting hurt by a tambourine.
No, their actual argument was that a state license was necessary, so hospitals and clinics could more easily differentiate them from, quote, other non-music therapy musicians.
Wait. They literally lobbied the government to build a legal wall around themselves just to keep out other musicians who might want to play music in a hospital.
That's exactly what they did.
And the ultimate irony here, according to the report, is that the requirements they demanded the government enforce were the exact same requirements needed for a private certification they already voluntarily held.
Right, they already had a private credential.
They already had a private club that proved their qualifications. But they wanted the government to take their voluntary private club and turn it into a mandatory, legally enforced monopoly where anyone outside the club could be arrested or fined for playing music for a patient.
It's rent-seeking in its purest form.
And while that might sound a little silly when we talk about music therapy, the real-world victims of this system are deeply impacted. These barriers do not hurt the wealthy elites. They hurt the most vulnerable populations in our economy.
That is a crucial, vital point that gets lost in all the abstract economic data. The people who are most severely impacted by the time, the upfront money, and the lost income required to get a license are not the wealthy.
Who is it?
It is minorities, it is people with lower levels of formal education, it is ex-offenders who are desperately trying to rebuild their lives and stay out of the prison system, and it is military spouses who are forced to move frequently.
Let's spend some time breaking down some specific human examples of who gets hurt, because the report is full of them, and it is honestly infuriating.
Let's do it.
Let's look at African-style hair braiding. This is a traditional practice that uses no chemicals, no dyes, no scissors. It's incredibly safe. But in Louisiana, to legally braid hair for money, the state demands that you undergo 500 hours of specialized training to get an alternative hair design permit.
500 hours.
500 hours. That requires quitting your job and paying tuition. As a result of this massive barrier, in 2012, there were only 32 legal African-style hair braiders operating in the entire state of Louisiana.
Just 32 for the whole state.
But if you cross the border into neighboring Mississippi, a state with a smaller overall black population, they take a completely different approach. Mississippi only requires a simple, inexpensive registration to braid hair.
So what's the process there?
You fill out a form, you pay a small fee, and you get to work. No 500 hours of unpaid training. The result, Mississippi has over 1,200 legal tax-paying hair braiders.
Over 1,000 more small businesses.
And here is the absolute kicker. The data shows there is absolutely no difference in the rate of consumer complaints between the two states. The extra 500 hours mandated in Louisiana didn't make consumers one bit safer. It just successfully destroyed hundreds of potential small businesses.
We see this exact same absurdity when we look at tour guides in Savannah, Georgia.
Oh, this one is ridiculous.
For a significant period of time, the city of Savannah required tour guides to pass a rigorous licensing exam covering the minutiae of the city's history. They had to pay an annual fee, submit to a criminal background check, And get this, actually pass a physical medical exam, all just for the legal right to walk backward down a public sidewalk and talk about historical buildings to tourists.
A physical medical exam to talk about a building.
The Institute for Justice eventually had to step in and file a lawsuit to help strike that ordinance down on First Amendment grounds. But the fact that the city government enforced it for so long shows just how far regulatory capture can go when incumbent businesses want to restrict competition.
And what about the impact on military families? You have the story of Heather Kokesh del Castillo. She had a very successful, thriving health coaching business in California. She essentially gave clients dietary advice and workout plans.
Nothing invasive.
Exactly. California did not require a specialized state license for this specific coaching, but her husband is in the military, and he receives orders relocating him to a base in Florida.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Like a good military spouse, she uproots her life, moves her family across the country, sets up her business in Florida, and promptly discovers that the state of Florida does require a highly specific, burdensome license to give dietary advice.
Even though she was already doing it successfully.
Right. So instead of just continuing to do the exact same job she was already doing successfully and safely in California, she was told she had to go back to college for years and spend tens of thousands of dollars to get a piece of paper.
Did she do it?
She couldn't do it. She had to shut her entire business down. The regulatory system actively punished her because of her husband's service to the country.
And we must recognize that this system doesn't just stifle individual small business owners, it actively stifles broader technological innovation.
You're talking about the tech startup in Mississippi.
Yes. The report details the case of a tech startup called Visaline. These entrepreneurs created a very clever software program. It takes dense legal property descriptions, the confusing text that describes property lines, and uses software to overlay those lines directly onto satellite photos.
That sounds super helpful.
It makes it incredibly easy to visualize property boundaries. It is incredibly useful for small community banks that need to make small loans, where paying for a full, physical, on-the-ground survey by a traditional surveyor simply isn't financially feasible. It was a great innovation that filled a gap in the market.
But the established state surveying board didn't see it as an innovation. They saw it as a threat, and they are coming after them, right?
Exactly. The Mississippi Board of Licensure for Professional Engineers and Surveyors literally sued Visaline. They sought an injunction to shut the company down entirely and force them to return all the earnings they had made, which would instantly bankrupt the startup.
Wait, on what grounds?
Because the founders of Visaline do not personally hold state surveying licenses.
But they aren't out there surveying anything.
No. Even though the company's not physically surveying anything, they aren't out in the field with tripods and lasers. They are simply using software to visualize existing public data. The licensed surveyors view this new software as a threat to their monopoly, and they're using the power of the state licensing board as a weapon to crush their competition.
So if we take a step back, we have frustrated handymen on Reddit. We have shuttered hair braiding salons in Louisiana. We have unemployed military spouses in Florida. And we have sued tech startups in Mississippi.
It's happening everywhere.
These aren't just frustrating, isolated anecdotes of government overreach. When you multiply these stories, these invisible barriers, across hundreds of professions in all 50 states, the financial damage to the U.S. economy is staggering. We are talking about macroeconomic destruction on a massive scale.
Which brings us to the core economic analysis of Dr. Kleiner and Dr. Vorotnikov's research. They meticulously take all this data and break down the macroeconomic math into 3 distinct categories of loss.
Okay, let's get into the math.
These are 3 separate, quantifiable ways that occupational licensing bleeds the national economy dry every single year.
Okay, we need to go through these one by one, and I want to spend some time on them because these concepts are dense and the numbers are absolutely huge. The first cost they identify is lost jobs.
Yes, because people are legally blocked from entering occupations by these high barriers, whether it's the 500 hours for braiding or the 4 years for plumbing. They simply don't take those jobs.
They just give up.
They do something else or they drop out of the labor force entirely. The researchers estimate that because of licensing, the national economy loses roughly 1.8 to 1.9 million jobs every single year.
Almost 2 million jobs.
These are jobs that would exist, services that would be provided if the barriers were removed. To put that scale in perspective at the state level, a small state like Rhode Island loses nearly 7,000 jobs annually. A massive economic engine like California loses nearly 196,000 jobs every single year, purely because of licensing barriers.
Almost 2 million jobs that just vanish into thin air. That leads us to the second cost, which the report refers to as deadweight loss.
Ah, deadweight loss.
This is a term you hear in economics classes, but I want to make sure we really unpack what deadweight loss actually means in this specific context,
Yeah.
because it represents a massive amount of hidden damage. Can you explain the physical mechanism of deadweight loss?
Absolutely. Deadweight loss is an economic term used to estimate the value of lost economic output and lost consumer surplus. It happens when a market is made artificially inefficient.
So how does licensing trigger that?
When licensing restricts the supply of workers, let's say plumbers, the price of plumbing goes up. We establish that with the wage premium. When the price of a service goes up significantly, the basic law of demand dictates that people will consume less of it.
Right, they can't afford it.
We touched on this briefly with the Cadillac Effect, but let's look at how it actually alters human behavior. If dental hygienist licenses are made incredibly restrictive, the cost of running a dental clinic soars and the price of a standard cleaning doubles. What happens?
People stop getting their teeth cleaned.
Lower-income families simply stop going to the dentist. They skip their checkups, which leads to worse health outcomes down the road. If veterinary tech licenses become too burdensome, the cost of pet care skyrockets. Families might delay taking a sick dog to the vet or skip annual rabies vaccines entirely.
Because the price was artificially inflated.
If electricians are allowed to charge exorbitant monopoly rates because there are only a few of them legally allowed to work in a county, homeowners won't pay them to install a new outlet.
Right, they'll try to do it themselves.
Instead, the homeowner goes to the hardware store, watches a YouTube video, and tries to do the dangerous electrical work themselves, often resulting in fires or injuries.
Which is so much worse for public safety.
All of that economic activity, the dental visits, the vet care, the safe electrical work that would have happened in a free market but didn't happen because the artificial price was too high, is the deadweight loss.
And what's the number on that?
The report calculates this lost economic output equals between $6.2 billion and $7.1 billion every single year.
$7 billion of wealth and well-being just erased from society because the prices were forced too high. But the report points out that $7 billion is actually the conservative estimate, right?
Very conservative.
Because deadweight loss only looks at the transactions that didn't happen. The third cost, which the researchers consider the true full cost of licensing, is a broader measure called misallocated resources.
This raises a profoundly important point about how economists measure systemic damage. Deadweight loss only measures the missing transactions. It completely ignores the immense amount of money, time, and human capital that is actively wasted trying to comply with the system.
Give me an example of that waste.
Let's think about Heather, the military spouse in Florida. If she decides she desperately wants to keep her coaching business, and she is forced to go back to university for 4 years to get a degree to do a job she already mastered.
Right, the tuition.
The tens of thousands of dollars she spends on unnecessary tuition, and the 4 years of potential income she didn't earn while sitting in those classes represent massive misallocated resources. She could have been producing value. Instead, she was jumping through bureaucratic hoops.
And it's not just the individuals wasting money.
No, consider the professional associations themselves. When cosmetologists or plumbers pay mandatory dues to their industry associations, and those associations take millions of dollars and spend it hiring lobbyists to wine and dine state senators to keep competitors out.
Oh, wow.
That is money that could have been spent on research, on better tools, or on professional development. Instead, it is wasted on political rent-seeking.
My absolute favorite, or maybe least favorite, example of misallocated resources from the report revolves around this concept called featherbedding.
Oh, featherbedding is wild.
I'd never heard this term before reading this report, but once you understand it, it is infuriating. The report notes that in some states, you're required by law to have a fully licensed plumber or electrician physically present on the job site just to connect a large commercial refrigerator in a restaurant or a grocery store.
Just to connect it.
Right. So picture this scenario. A restaurant buys a complex $20,000 commercial fridge. The manufacturer sends out their own highly trained, specialized expert who knows exactly how to install this specific complex piece of machinery.
And that expert is usually not licensed by the state.
Correct. This expert is unlicensed by the state, but they know the machine inside and out. The expert does all the actual physical work of setting it up. But because of the state law, a licensed plumber has to be hired to come to the restaurant, stand there, basically leaning against the wall, drinking a coffee, just watching the expert work.
Just watching.
The plumber does nothing. But The restaurant owner. The customer is forced by law to pay the hourly rate of both the expert and the plumber who is just watching.
Featherbedding is the ultimate perfect illustration of economic inefficiency. We are literally forcing the economy to misallocate its human capital.
We are paying people to do nothing.
When a brilliant health coach is forced back into a classroom, when an innovative software startup is sued into oblivion, or when an experienced handyman like our guy from the Reddit thread is forced to work as a lowly apprentice for 4 years, taking a pay cut just to satisfy a rule, the entire economy suffers.
We are trapping human potential.
When Dr. Kleiner and Dr. Vorotnikov calculate all of this, the wasted time, the forced education, the lobbying expenditures, and the featherbedding, this broader measure shows a catastrophic hit to the national economy.
What's the final number?
We are looking at a total loss of $183.9 billion to $197.3 billion every single year.
Nearly $200 billion a year. It is essentially an invisible, crushing tax on the entire American economy, funneling money from consumers and new workers directly into the pockets of established incumbents.
It really is an invisible tax.
But I have to ask the question that I know people listening right now are screaming at their devices. The pushback is obvious.
Let's hear it.
Okay, let's say we agree the system is corrupt and expensive. If we just get rid of licenses tomorrow, won't we just have total chaos? Won't our homes be built by scam artists? Won't our hair be cut by people using rusty scissors? Won't our plumbing be leaking raw sewage into our drinking water?
Right, the apocalyptic scenario.
It feels like we're being forced to choose between a $200 billion corrupt tax and pure, dangerous anarchy.
It is a very fair question, and it is the exact fear that lobbying boards rely on. But it presents a completely false dichotomy. We do not have to choose between a rigid 7,000-hour mandate and pure, unregulated anarchy.
So what's the middle ground?
There is a vast middle ground. There are several, much less restrictive yet highly effective, options available to governments to protect consumers without destroying the economy. Jessica Poitras from the IJ outlined these beautifully in her testimony regarding the Pennsylvania bill.
Okay, walk us through them.
First and foremost, there is simple market competition. In the modern age of instant online reviews, Yelp, Google ratings, and community reputation tracking, the market is a ruthless regulator.
Right, if a handyman does terrible, dangerous work, their reputation tanks instantly and they go out of business.
Exactly. You don't need a state board to tell you who has a 1-star rating.
Right, but what about professions where we want proactive proof of skill before we hire them? What about certifications?
Voluntary private certification is an excellent proven alternative. Ironically, this is exactly what those music therapists in Minnesota already had before they lobbied the government.
Oh, right, the private club.
The Certification Board for Music Therapists tests and certifies people privately. If you, as a consumer or a hospital administrator, want a verified, highly trained music therapist, you look for that specific private certification.
So it's still a signal of quality.
It sends a strong signal of quality and safety to the market. But, and this is the key difference, it does not make it illegal for someone without the certification to practice. It relies on the consumer to make an informed choice rather than the government using a monopoly to force the choice.
And if something goes terribly wrong, if the unlicensed guy does burn your house down, you aren't just out of luck, you still have legal recourse, right?
Absolutely. The legal system provides accountability, creating and enforcing private causes of action, meaning the legal right for consumers to easily sue a provider for damages if they are harmed by incompetence or fraud keeps professionals accountable without requiring a license to start working.
You can sue them if they mess up.
Finally, if a state is truly concerned about catastrophic damage, they can simply require mandatory bonding or liability insurance.
How does that help?
If a professional has to carry insurance to operate, the insurance company itself will act as the regulator. Insurance companies will refuse to cover someone who is repeatedly incompetent and causes constant damage.
That makes total sense. They aren't going to underwrite a terrible electrician.
Exactly. All of these alternatives, reputation, voluntary certification, legal liability, and insurance, protect the public safety. But none of them artificially block entry into the profession the way a government license does.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together. We started this deep dive looking at a very human, very frustrated handyman on Reddit.
A guy who just wanted to work.
A guy who just wanted to fix pipes and earn an honest living without taking a 4-year pay cut to be someone else's apprentice. And following his dilemma led us down a massive rabbit hole.
We went all the way down.
We discovered an almost $200 billion invisible tax dragging down the American economy. We've seen how occupational licensing constantly poses as a shining, necessary shield for consumer safety. But when you really look at the data, whether it is hair braiders in Louisiana, tour guides in Savannah, or software developers in Mississippi, it functions much more like a toll booth.
A toll booth where they keep all the money.
Right, and that toll booth is exclusively operated by the people who are already safely inside the industry, charging everyone else exorbitant fees for the right to pass.
The evidence across the board strongly suggests that this system restricts supply, stifles technological innovation, actively hurts the most vulnerable and marginalized workers in our society, and heavily inflates costs for consumers, all while rarely delivering the promised increases in safety or quality.
It's a monopoly.
It is, by every economic definition, a monopoly by another name.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over today as you go about your life.
Consider this: as artificial intelligence and machine learning become exponentially more advanced, they are beginning to do the work of lawyers, accountants, and medical diagnosticians.
Yeah, AI is getting incredibly capable.
So if AI begins displacing these highly licensed professions, will these exact same state boards try to outlaw AI software on the grounds of public safety? Are we building a regulatory system that will inevitably try to license the algorithms themselves just to protect the incumbents from the future?
It is a wild thought. The next time you walk into a professional's office or a salon or you hire a contractor and you see that ornate gold-embossed framed state license hanging proudly on the wall, ask yourself, is that piece of paper truly guaranteeing you a better, safer service? Or is it just a receipt for the monopoly premium you're about to pay on your bill? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden rules of the economy around you, and remember, just because a pipe isn't leaking doesn't mean the system isn't broken.